We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis in Meseches Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 31b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had made a distinction between a situation where you have a Safek Gerushin where it's 2 Eidim versus 2 Eidim, or you have a situation of a Safek Gerushin where it's 1 Eid versus 1 Eid, and this is all by a situation of Tsaras Erva, where you're not sure if the woman who was Erva was actually divorced or not, and therefore you're not sure if the co-wife is a Tsaras Erva or not. And the Gemara made the distinction and said, if you have a situation of 2 witnesses against 2 witnesses, and we don't know whether the woman that was Erva was divorced, so in that case you have to be strict, and you're going to say by the Tzara that she does Chalitza. Whereas when you're talking about 1 Eid versus 1 Eid, so there you actually say the Eidim cancel each other out, and you have a Chazaka. The original Chazaka in that case is that she is a Tzaras Erva. Started out that there was a marriage, you just don't know whether there was a divorce, and since there was a Chazaka that she was a Tzaras Erva, so she just marries Lashuk, she remains with that Chazaka. Whereas the Gemara had made a distinction and said by a case of Kiddushin that's not true, because by a case of Kiddushin, so originally she starts out with the status that she is not a Tzaras Erva and she's supposed to do Yibum. And so therefore, since the original status is to do Yibum, now we have a suffix whether there was a Kiddushin, so we say in that particular situation we can be Machmir and say that we require Chalitza because the Chazaka anyway is Yibum, so even if people get confused and she accidentally does Yibum, it's not a big deal, that was the original Chazaka. But the Gemara says this distinction really is not true between 1 Eid versus 1 Eid and 2 Eidim versus 2 Eidim, because we have a situation of property of an individual called Barshatya, who sometimes he was sane and sometimes he was insane, and there was a situation of 2 Eidim versus 2 Eidim who were debating whether he made the sale when it was an effective sale when he was sane or whether he was insane. And the Gemara there said, V'ara ukma b'chezkas barshatya. The 2 Eidim cancel each other out. The 2 Eidim against the 2 Eidim cancel out. And we do follow chazaka. So this whole distinction that we follow chazaka only by 1 Eid versus 1 Eid and not by 2 Eidim versus 2 Eidim does not seem accurate at all. And so the Gemara continues, Elo Amar Abaya. Rather, Abaya says to reject what Rabbah says entirely, and there really is no distinction between situations of Kiddushin and Gerushin in this case. Yagid Olav Reo. Yagid Olav Reo means one case in the Mishnah will reveal the other case. Tana b'Kiddushin. The Tana of our Mishnah taught a case by Kiddushin. What did the Tana of the Mishnah say? The Tana of the Mishnah said if you have a situation of a Safek Kiddushin, Safek Tzaras Erva, you do Chalitza. V'hu adin l'Gerushin. And the same thing would be true by Gerushin. You'd have the exact same case. Whatever case was listed by Kiddushin would be true by Gerushin too. Let's say you have a Safek, if it's close to him, close to her, so then that would be the same exact thing. We would say do Chalitza. And you could go the other way around as well. Tana b'Gerushin. The Mishnah had a few cases by Gerushin over there. Those were other kinds of cases, not exactly Safek types of situations, but situations where it's not a get lechatchila, but b'diavad it is. V'hu adin l'kiddushin, and those same cases would apply to kiddushin. In other words, there really is no distinction between the cases of gerushin and kiddushin. The Mishnah lists some cases of suffix by kiddushin, and the Mishnah lists some cases by gerushin where it's lechatchila not such a good gerushin, but b'diavad it would be a good gerushin. You could apply those cases in both directions. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rava, so Rava said to Abaya, Iyagid olav reo, if one case reflects on the other, so my zehu dekatani, it doesn't make sense because the language of the Mishnah was zehu, this is the case, as if there are no other cases. So Elo Amar Rava, so rather Rava says a slightly different answer, Kol sheyesh b'kiddushin yesh b'gerushin. The cases that we had by kiddushin, meaning the case of Safek Karav Lo, or Safek Karav Lo, genuine Safek, whether there was marriage, that actually would apply by gerushin. However, v'yesh b'gerushin, but there were some cases listed in the Mishnah that were by gerushin, masha ein kain b'kiddushin, and those cases actually did not apply by kiddushin. As Rashi over here says, v'yesh b'gerushin she'ein Safek l'inyan kiddushin. There were cases listed in the Mishnah which would not be counted as a Safek by kiddushin. Kigon zman, for example, the date, because the halacha of dating a get is not the same by dating a shtar kiddushin. Kidim mefarish l'kaman, we're going to explain this as we go on. The shtar kiddushin kigon hamakadesh b'shtar. If you are a makadesh with a shtar, a woman, you betroth the woman with a shtar, lo tiknu zman. There is no institution of zman. So if you leave off the date on a get, it's worse than if you leave off the date on a shtar kiddushin where there was no institution of zman. That's what it means to say v'yesh b'gerushin. There are some cases by the gerushin masha'in b'kiddushin which wouldn't apply by kiddushin. V'zehu de gerushin lav dafka, and therefore the zehu that applied by gerushin, that was actually lav dafka. In other words, when it said zehu, it was only dafka in one situation, but it wasn't dafka in both situations. And as Rashi explains, v'zehu de gerushin lav dafka. When it says zehu by gerushin, it's lav dafka, meaning de mashmo zehu de have a suffix begerushin. When you say the word zehu by gerushin, it's like these cases are a suffix, meaning let's say you leave off the zman or whatever. Avol suffix karav lo have a suffix. But the issue of if it's close to her, close to him, that apparently was not included. That was the mashmos, but that's what the Gemara is saying. It's not true. That zehu is not really true. Really, the suffix karav lo applies by gerushin as well, right? So it implied avol safek karov lo have a safek legerushin. Va'aydi the ton is zeu b'kiddushin. Now, since it said zeu by kiddushin, which there really is limited, these are the cases by kiddushin, and don't add other cases. The dafka zeu is only this case. The kamash malan zeu safek karov hu shayach b'kiddushin. Avo safek zman lo shayach. But there, the zeu actually means something. It means if you have a situation of safek karov that applies by kiddushin, safek zman does not apply. So the zehu in one of the instances in the Mishnah is in fact dafka, is specific and is intended to mean only these cases and not others. But by gerushin, you have to understand that zehu was lav dafka. We just had it by gerushin because we had that word by kiddushin. Ela mishum the tana zehu b'kiddushin. Since the Tana had the phrase of zehu by kiddushin, tana nami zehu b'gerushin. We had the zehu by gerushin as well. And now the Gemara explains the zehu v'zehu de kiddushin l'mutei mai. So the zehu that's by kiddushin, what is it coming to exclude? Like we just said, l'mu'utei zman deleka b'kiddushin. It excludes zman because zman doesn't even apply by kiddushin. If you leave the date off a shtar kiddushin, it's no big deal. That takana never applied. So therefore, when it says in the Mishnah you leave off the date by gerushin, that's a case by gerushin. That's a situation of suffix, so to speak, by gerushin. But by kiddushin, that case would not be an accurate situation of suffix, and that's why it means zehu. These are cases of suffix and not a situation of leaving off the zman. And the Gemara continues, so if that's true, why is it that there's no institution of writing the date in a shtar kiddushin? So the Gemara says, I understand, according to the Manda Amar, who says that the reason that we date a get is because of piri. Now, what it means to say is that by there's a situation where you can cheat in terms of the fruits, the profits in terms of gerushin. As Rashi over here says, there's a machlokus over there. Why did they institute a date that has to be written on the get? Mishum piri, one explanation is because of the fruits, meaning leida me'emosai tigve mibalo peiros sha'achal mi nichsei milug shalo. The peiros, the halach is, let's say a woman brings property into the marriage, it's called nichsei milug, when the husband's allowed to take the fruits of that property. So now the problem is that when there's a divorce, at that point in time, from that point in time of the divorce, she now gets those fruits. So therefore, we need the date to know about the piri. The kasavar mishash and nasan einav bolagarsha shuvein lo labal peiros. According to that Manda Amar, the moment that he decides to divorce her, meaning he writes the get, that's why you put the date of the time the get is written, not when it's given. So the moment he decides to divorce her, writes the get, the moment that zman is there, the baal loses out on those peiros. So that would make sense because peiros is an issue by gerushin, but arusa less la piri. But when it comes to Erisin, that doesn't create any dinim by Peiros, so that wouldn't make any sense to date it. It would make sense that there's no institution of Zman by Erisin for that reason. As Rashi says, Arusa les lapiri lafikach lo teknu b'shtar kiddushin. That's why we didn't institute a date by the shtar kiddushin. She'ein habal ochel Peiros ad shedikonis l'chuppah, because the din of the Baal getting the Peiros only happens by chuppah. Dechi tikon rabbanon piri labal mishum pirkona lo kamachayev bo ela miksuba va'elach. This all goes from the time of the ksuba. The tanai ksuba hu dim tishtaboy afrikin. There's a Tanai in the Ksuba. If you get captured, I'm going to redeem you. It's all connected to that. It's not involved, or it's not related to the Erisin, and so therefore that would make sense according to that Manda Amar why there's no Zman by the Kiddushin. But there's another explanation why we date a get, and that's because he may have married his niece, as Rashi over here says, Mishum Basachoso, Shemi Nasli Basachoso. Maybe a man marries his niece, Betizna Ta'achtav, and she's going to commit adultery. V'yira Eidim Mimashmishin Uvoyin V'yachos Aleh. He's going to see there's a problem over here that she committed adultery, she's going to get in trouble. He doesn't want her to get in trouble. He'll have mercy on her. V'yigreshen, and he'll divorce her. V'yomar kodem znus shatem idim kvar niskar. She'll say, "Oh, you're testifying about his nus. It's not true. I already divorced her previously." So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So if you put a date on a get, that's going to assure everybody that the date is there. We know from when she was divorced. There's no way for the husband to cover up for the znus of his wife. The idea is that when he marries basachoso, when he marries the situation of his niece, so the idea is that in that case, it's more likely that he's going to want to do this and cover up. So according to that, if the reason why is because you're trying to cover up his nus, so we want to stop that, and that's why I put a date in a get. So therefore, the same thing over here, liskin zman. So by a shtar kiddushin also, there's the same reason to have a date, as Rashi says, liskin zman nami b'shtar kiddushin shamatizne v'yomer kodem kiddushin avi. He can also cover up. He'll say this nus was before the kiddushin. We need a date on that shtar so that he can't cover up. It should be the same logic. Why shouldn't there be a date in the shtar kiddushin? And so the Gemara answers to that, misham de'iko de mekadesh b'chaspa, ve'iko de mekadesh b'shtar. The fact is, some people do kiddushin with money, some people do kiddushin with shtar. So therefore, since there's different ways to do kiddushin, not all of them involve a document, so lo tikun rabbanan Zman. So it's simply for that reason that the Rabbanan never instituted Zman by Kiddushin. And so the Gemara says, Amar le Rav Acha, Breder Rav Yosef le Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha, Breder Rav Yosef said to Rav Ashi, Va'avda de'ika dekani bechaspa, ve'ika b'shtara. But what about by an eved? When you sell a slave, so some people acquire the slave with money, and some use a shtar. V'tikon Rabbanan Zman, and there the Rabbanan do say that you should have a date. So the fact that there are other ways to do it, that's not really a good answer when it comes to Kiddushin. And to that the Gemara answers, Hasam over there, Ruba b'shtara. The majority of situations of sales of Avadim is with a shtar, so we follow shtar. Hacha Ruba b'kaspa, but over here when it comes to Kiddushin by a woman, the majority is using money and or objects of value, and therefore, since that's the majority, we did not institute a Zman in the get. And the Gemara continues and offers another answer. If you want, I could say another answer, Mishum de lo efshar, because it's not possible. Hey, Chili Avid, what exactly are you going to do if you're going to put a Zman in a Shtar Kiddushin? Lincha gabe dido. Let's say you put the Shtar Kiddushin and you put it into her possession. So machkale, so then she'll just erase the date. It's very easy for her to get around it and claim that there was no situation of znus. Lincha gabe dide. Also, let's say you put the Shtar Kiddushin, he's the one that keeps the Shtar Kiddushin, the husband. Zimnin de basachosui. It's the same problem. Maybe again, she's his niece. He's going to try to cover up for her. Again, he's going to try to conceal the date and say that it wasn't znus. And lin chagabe edim. So then you'll say, let's just let the edim hold the shtar kiddushin. Id zachiri leisu. Listen, now if they remember when the kiddushin was, they could just testify. V'ilo, and if not, zimnin dechazu michtav avasu masadi. Maybe they're just going to look at the date and testify from that. V'rachmon amar mipiam v'lo mipiksavim. That's not allowed because the Torah says you have to testify from their mouths. They have to testify from based on how they remember, not just based on what they're reading. So that could mess up the whole testimony. So the Gemara therefore says we have no way really, even if we put in a date, we don't know where we should keep the shtar, that date is going to have any effect. So the Gemara says, but if so, by divorce also, by the get also, won't she just erase the date? There's all kinds of things that can happen. And so the Gemara says, no, hasam lahatzala didaka asi, over there by a get, the get is there to save her. She's trying to claim that she was divorced. She wants this to be a kosher get. She's not going to go erase parts of the get. She's not going to mess with the get, so we're not worried. But over here, lechova didaka asi, here the shtar kiddushin is actually the thing that's obligating her. It's saying that she's a married woman and that there's nus. So she's not going to mind messing around with that shtar, erasing the date or whatever, because who cares if the shtar is no good? To her, the shtar represents an obligation. It represents her whole chiyuv, and therefore it's more of a concern in this case. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Gimel Achin, let's say you have a case of three brothers, Nisuin, Gimel Nachrios, and they're married to three women. The three women are not related to one another. Umeis Echad Mehen, now one of the brothers dies. V'yasaba Hasheni Maimer, and so the second brother, he begins the process of Yibam, he does the Maimer, the betrothal process of the Yibam with the widow. V'meis, and then he dies. So you have a situation over here is that the second brother, he had a wife, an original wife, and he's also starting the process of Yibam, but not finishing it. So it's not really, this widow is not really his wife, but the widow is sort of his wife. Not really his wife, but he began the process. So you have a strange situation here where she's really coming kind of from two houses. So the halacha then is, Hare elu chotzos v'lo Yevamos. These wives now, these two women of the second husband, they should do chalitza and they should not do yibum. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Umeis echad mehen Yevama yavo aleha. It says one of the brothers dies, so then you perform yibum. And the idea is she'aleha zekas yavam echad. When we talk about doing yibum, there has to be a zeka, a bond based only on one brother. V'lo she'aleh zekas beis yivamim. But you don't want there to be a bond coming from two, and that's what's really happening over here. She's really coming from both brothers who died, and that messes up the entire yibum. As Rashi over here explains, Zeika Shnei Yevamin, the Chosman Shelo Kansa, because if the second brother didn't actually marry her, so Adayin Zekas Rishon Aleh, so there's still a bond from the first one coming. V'nitosvas Aleh Zekas Maro, and there's an added bond coming because the Maimer, the process began with the second one. Hareka Shemei Zeh, so when the second brother dies, Nosra Allah Zekas Shneim, she has a double Zeka on her. V'ilu Kansa have a Paka Zeka Tekama. Now, if he had married her, the second brother, so that first Zeka's gone, that's fine. V'chimayas Lo Have Olela Zekas Sheni. Then when he would die, there's only going to be the second Zeka. Inami lo avid b'maim, or the other way. Let's say he didn't start the process. Lo hava lo el zekas rishon. Then it wouldn't be a problem also because there'll be the zekas rishon. But here, where he kind of started the process but didn't finish it, you have the problem of zekas beis yivamin. And the Mishnah continues. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, miyavim le'ezu sheyirtze. You could do yibum to either one of the women. V'choletz l'shni, and just do chalitza to the second woman. And Rashi over here explains, miyavim le'ezu sheyirtze, do yibum to whichever one. Kidikatani taima beperak sheni bebraisa. The reasons given in the second parak in the braisa. Imamaro shel sheni maimer, the way it goes is like this. If the maimer of the second guy was effective, so Esha sheni hu bo, then she's the wife of the second one, no problem, only coming from the second one. Vim eino maimer, Eshes rishon hu bo, if the maimer is nothing, so then it's the Eshes rishon. In other words, the way Rabbi Shimon looks at it, it's a genuine suffix, but either way, if the maimer is good, then it's all to the second husband, and if the maimer is bad, then it's all to the first husband, it's no problem. Now you should do chalitza to the second woman. Why? Because the fact you're doing yibum to one woman doesn't necessarily take care of the other woman. Why? Because dilma maimer lo kani, because maybe the maimer was not effective. Maybe each of these women are coming from a different husband. In other words, if the maimer of the second brother was not effective, so the first woman is coming from the first brother, the second one from the second brother, he's got to take care of each one independently. The fact that he does yibum with one doesn't take care of the other. He's going to need to do chalitza. Now he can't do yibum with both. Dilma maimer kani, because maybe the other way around. Maybe the maimer was effective and they're both coming from the same brother. You only have to choose, or you're only supposed to choose one woman. It might be beis yevamos from one house, and so therefore, since Rabbi Shimon views it as a full suffix in both directions, the solution is do yibum with one of the women and do chalitza with the other. And the Gemara says, "V'zeikas beis yevamin do raisa." If this idea over here of zeikas beis yevamin is a do raisa halacha, and the Mishnah itself actually did quote a pasuk. It said, "Umeis achad mehen yevama yavo aleh she'aleh zeikas yavam echad v'lo she'aleh zeikas beis yevamin." There's a problem of zeikas beis yevamin. You're not allowed to do yibum in that situation. So if this is a doraisa situation over here, so chalitza nami lo tibay, there should be no requirement for chalitza either. We should say you have a situation of a woman who's coming from two houses together because the maimer is sort of partially kona, and if that's the case, so then we should say you don't need chalitza either. Why is the Mishnah saying you require chalitza? And so the Gemara explains elami d'Rabbanan. Rather, this halach is all d'Rabbanan. U'gezeira shema yomru beis Yevamos habos mi bayis echad mes Yevamos. The reason why the Rabbanan here are saying do chalitza is because of a decree that people might get confused and think if you have two Yevamos from one house, they can also do yibum. Rashi over here explains elami d'Rabbanan d'midoraisa maimer lo kani. What the Gemara means to say is really on a doraisa level, this maimer is nothing, and these two women are coming from two different houses. V'havelu shtei Yevamos mi beis batim. It's two Yevamos from two different houses, from two different brothers. V'tarvayu motzi liyavume. Both of them can really do yibum. V'Rabbanan de gazer, but the Rabbanan, they made a gezerah. They were concerned if both women do yibum, it's going to be confusing. Shema yomer, because maybe people will think beis Yevamos habos mi bayis echad mes Yevamos. They're not going to realize it's coming from two houses. Maybe they'll think because there was a maimer done, it's coming from one house, and they'll think two Yevamos from one house can do yibum, and that's why we say to do chalitza. So in other words, what the Gemara is saying is really on a doraisa level in this case. Certainly he can do yibum with both women. That's going to create confusion. So therefore we do chalitza instead with both women. So the Gemara says uniyavim l'chada v'nichlotz l'chada. So let's do another solution. Why not have him do yibum to one woman and do chalitza to the other? Now you're not going to have confusion because he's not doing yibum to both women. And so the Gemara says to that, gezerah, there's a decree. Shema yomru, maybe people will be confused and they'll say, bayis echad miksaso bani. They're going to say again, maybe this is a situation of bayis echad, and they're going to say by a situation of bayis echad like we're doing over here. Maybe you do yibum with one, you do chalitza with the other. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph.